So you have two sides to this argument. You've got the murderers and the merciful. So we have the two speakers, one for each. Now, on the merciful side, we have here Camden, fresh down from Hogwarts, brandishing his book of sophistical spells to attack the argument. And on the other side, you have Roger, the man who still has not forgiven Socrates for taking the bloody hemlock, but certainly has more skin in the game when it comes to assisted dying. So that's where we start. And I think we're going to have... you're going to speak first, Camden?
Oh, I think Roger's going to speak first.
Oh, okay. Well, in case you pass away halfway through.
I think we have 5 minutes each, by the way, don't we? And you're keeping an eye on us. So I think the rules are we've both got up to 5 minutes, maximum 5 minutes to put forward our points. And then we've each got 3 minutes to give a rebuttal. So we're not going to be here all evening, but we have a few points. So I'm going to make a philosophical case against assisted dying. Now, I do understand that people facing severe suffering want dignity and control. And the modern liberal argument is that rational adults should have autonomy over their own lives and deaths. My concern is that the issue becomes much more complicated once we ask what a human being actually is and how free our choices really are. Where I'd start with is to say that human dignity should not become conditional. The main idea is that human beings possess intrinsic dignity just because they are human beings, or some would say because they are rational persons. And human worth should not depend on comfort, independence, productivity, or absence of suffering. Once society accepts that some lives are no longer worth continuing, dignity risks becoming conditional. So I would say that human dignity should not become negotiable, and there is a moral difference between relieving suffering and intentionally ending the sufferer. It was Immanuel Kant who reminds us that rational beings are ends in themselves, not things whose value rises and falls with circumstances. And another thing we have to be aware of is what we might call coercion or social influence, pressure. Assisted dying often assumes isolated rational individuals making fully free choices. However, real human beings are vulnerable to guilt, dependency, loneliness, financial pressures, and family expectations. For example, an elderly, wealthy person may feel that they ought to die so that their heirs inherit earlier, or because they feel themselves to be a burden. The danger is often not explicit coercion, it is internalized pressure and self-sacrifice. Some vulnerable people may slowly come to feel that they ought to die. I'd also like to point out two different conceptions of human beings. One, we might call it the modern Western liberal tradition, sees us as isolated individuals. Other traditions, however, see us as members of a community. So rather than being isolated individuals, our lives are woven into families and communities, so that death is not something purely private. The question isn't simply, do I own my life, but also, what obligations do I have to the network of relationships that partly constitutes who I am? This gives the talk philosophical depth beyond slogans. And of course, we come to now what we may call the slippery slope and moral drift. Once intentional medical killing becomes accepted in some cases, the categories may gradually widen. Where will we draw the line? People with terminal illness, chronic suffering, psychological suffering, dependency, loss of agency. What about conditions such as Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, which raise difficult questions about autonomy and consent? Assisted dying is justified in the name of autonomy, yet pressure may grow to apply it precisely to people whose autonomy is fading or unclear. And we may discover there is a thinner line between euthanasia and eugenics that we would like to admit. Of course, suffering is terrible, and a compassionate society should relieve suffering whenever it can. But I worry that once we redefine killing as a form of care, we may slowly change how we value the vulnerable, the dependent, and the suffering themselves. Modern ideas of human rights, including the right to life, ultimately depend on the belief that human dignity is intrinsic and non-negotiable. Some moral boundaries exist precisely to protect people when they are weakest, most dependent, and least able to defend themselves. My concern is that once those boundaries become negotiable, society may slowly begin treating some lives as less worthy of protection than others.
I've let this question simmer with me for a while. It's challenging, but the state should not be the author of the end of your autobiography. I don't want people to consider this debate of an abandonment of everything sacred, but there's a couple points I need to rebut. First, people are their decisions, not their flesh. So to respect them is to respect their decisions rather than just their pulse. That is to respect them as an end in themselves, as Kant put it. Second, I should not be legally forced to stay alive out of an obligation that I hold to other people. That autonomy should be put into my control. That isn't liberal dogma. That's fairness. It's scarily unfair to force people to stay alive just so they can perform in front of other people. Third, it is a tragedy that some vulnerable people may feel the pressure to end their own lives, but it is less cruel to give people the choice with some friction than it is to force people to lead undignified ends to their lives. Some people may just suit palliative care more, but for some people, being force-fed out of a tube just may not be for them. Coercing the vulnerable to be tied puppets participating in a hopeless, degrading, and painful dance of pretending to have hope is just more cruel. Fourth, the opposition would be correct to suggest that the empirical record here is that in every jurisdiction that assisted dying has been legalized, its provision has expanded. But that's because we're not on some sort of slippery slope. It's because assisted dying's implementation is a slow process and logically adjacent cases have taken time to be identified. The liberal philosophical tradition isn't wrong when it posits the existence of a rational agent. The state, in a healthy democracy, should be an emergent property of use of people's autonomy rather than a block to it. Parliamentary sovereignty shouldn't extend as far as it does. I'd like to steelman the opposition, so let's deal with their strongest points first. Wanting to end your own life is not a fixed point. It's a weather system. Weather systems change. Sometimes. Everyone is subject to pressures and there should be friction between the choice and the outcome to avoid people killing themselves on a caprice. But there are consequences if we outrule assisted dying entirely. The exception to the rule makes the rule. Sometimes the alternatives are exhausted. It's not in the state's prerogative to undermine the free, autonomous choice of the individual. The reality is that if assisted dying does not get passed, the rich will fly out to Switzerland for these procedures, and the poor will just suffer more. And frankly, I think the rich are in a better position of having that choice. And if the rich are in a better position for having the choice to end their own lives, that shows that having the choice to end your own life is a better position. I understand that having the choice more readily available increases the likelihood of choosing it. But again, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I'm not proposing everyone wears a bomber vest all the time. What I'm proposing is giving equality between those who can terminate themselves by themselves and those who can't. Whether you can or cannot decide to end your own life should not depend on your proximity to a car park, your economic status, your mobility in your legs, your access to bleach, and other dangerous and irrelevant factors. It should depend your own choice. Life and death are not strict boundaries. It's a gradation, and it isn't like one and done, you're gone with assisted dying. It's more like you're stopping this kind of painful and so slow slope between life and death. Sometimes negotiating that downfall just isn't what you want to do. Sometimes you want to bring your end into your own remit. There are some conditions that are not curable, and there are some times where there isn't one more option that hasn't been exhausted. Sometimes people's back are against the walls, and those are the people we need to consider. We can talk about large-scale cultural shifts, but laws aren't made on the basis of culture at large. Laws are made on nitty-gritty case studies where the exception makes the rule. Those large-scale cultural shifts can be aided with friction and blockers to stop overuse and to have professionals involved. But ultimately, if the alternatives have been exhausted, it is time to allow people to make their own decisions. The liberal tradition we have in the West isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to celebrate and something to take to its logical conclusion. We're not pushing the boundaries of liberalism to its terrible, final, ultimate destination like it's some horrible science experiment. No, we've made a decision, and we should be consistent. Thank you.
So I have a little bit of a chance for a rebuttal here. So some of this depends on your view of human nature. And I think that you generally have a positive view of human nature. You'd probably think that if it wasn't for the nasty state and a bit of inequality, people would be nice to each other, I imagine. Yeah,
well,
that sort of person.
Soron God, fear and trembling, the whole week for you.
Whereas so what you're not dealing with is the way that one of my worries is that if we were, say, to legalise assisted dying, that people would be manipulated or persuaded or cajoled by people who are not very nice into perhaps, giving up their lives so they could give money to people. I also noticed something you didn't deal with in your talk, which was the Hippocratic Oath. So if you're a doctor or a nurse, I'm not sure if nurses also take it, but apparently you say that you will do no harm. So I don't know if, for example, you say, well, we're going to allow assisted dying, are you also involving members of the medical community, in helping people die? I don't have many points to make, but where I ended up in my talk was that the idea that there's something about human dignity and human life that is non-negotiable. And I'm just going to end up repeating with my conclusion that if you make it negotiable in some circumstances, my worry is that then begins a slippery slope. So, yeah.
The Hippocratic Oath one is an interesting point, and the government actually addressed it in their bill, and they said that death would be a matter of a quango, and doctors won't be able to administer assisted dying, and it has to be someone who's not taken the Hippocratic Oath, which I think is an interesting and positive step, because I think it does protect the Hippocratic Oath as a kind of part of our medical constitution. And I think that is a tragedy if people feel they're being forced. But again, whether people do it is their own choice. And sometimes if people want to say, actually, I want to serve my kids, I don't want to be a burden, sometimes that is their choice. It's not you to take the call that that's not the right thing to do. And there is a paradox between people should stay alive out of obligation and people should not be coerced into dying, because you're saying that other people should have the remit to control what you do with your life and death, other people might have the remit to control what you do with life or death, which I think is a contention in your argument there. I think that I do have a positive view of human nature, but I think that you're worried that people who aren't able to have the capacity to think for themselves might end up being kind of having euthanasia, which I think is a difficult situation to be in. But putting yourself in the shoes of someone who might not be able to articulate the amount of pain they're in, that is a dangerous situation to be in. And I think that's up to the medical professionals and families to decide what they want to do, rather than the state, who is blind to the individual case studies existing in the machinery that they're trying to operate with. Thank you.